Welcome to Rising, everyone. Happy Monday. Saagar, what are we doing today?
Happy Monday, Crystal. We've got an amazing show. Matt Schlapp from the American Conservative Union to talk about his latest trip to Hong Kong. Paul Steinhauser from the ground in New Hampshire after that huge Democratic convention over the weekend. The killer robots might be coming for us. We're going to break that down. And, of course, the panel to talk about all these new polls, especially the CBS poll, groundbreaking developments in the field. All that coming up today on Rising.
All right, Saagar, what are you looking at?
Well, Donald Trump shocked the world Saturday when he revealed he had scuttled a would-be secret summit between himself, the Afghan government, and the Taliban in a bid to end the war in Afghanistan. Ending the war in Afghanistan, of course, is a signature campaign promise that he has yet to deliver on, much like Barack Obama himself. Trump's reason for canceling the summit was a Taliban-claimed attack on civilians in the city of Kabul.
President Trump ultimately made the decision. He said, I want to talk to President Ghani. I want to talk to these Taliban negotiators. I want to look them in the eye. I want to see if we can get to the final outcome that we needed so that we could sign off on that deal. So we found that arrangement acceptable, that the verification was adequate, and we concluded this was a perfectly appropriate place. You don't get to negotiate with good guys. The reason you're in negotiations to end wars, to end conflict, to end violence, to reduce risk to the American people is almost always because the person across the table from you isn't exactly the finest.
The president and the Secretary of State quickly took a bevy of criticism from across official Washington for not going about the negotiations the right way or being too speedy in inviting the Taliban. Democrats sought to remind the president this is a terrorist organization we're dealing with here, as if they didn't already know. It's a good time to be reminded that the leading frontrunner for the Democratic Party is a man who sat next to Barack Obama for 8 years when he sent tens of thousands more troops to Afghanistan, drew down with no plan whatsoever, and got us deeper into this quagmire than President Bush. Joe Biden and many of these same establishment politicians are the same people who seem to somehow be okay with the fact that this week is the 18th anniversary of 9/11 and we are still at war in Afghanistan. Not only are we still at war, but we lose a dozen or so troops a year. There is no end in sight. What are these people's genius solution to the conflict? More troops, more money, more corruption, more lives, more denying the will of American citizens. Our partner government is riddled with corruption and ineptitude. The American public has voted on 3 separate occasions in presidential elections for people who promised to end the war. And the Taliban controlled untold amounts of ground in the country. The situation is extraordinarily dire, and I, for one, want as much negotiation as possible. Despite all of this, we see the entrenched foreign policy establishment saying the same things that they were saying 10 years ago. Oh, if we just send a few more thousand troops and maybe hold on to this ground here or there, then the Taliban, they're going to miraculously change their ways. These are bloodthirsty, corrupt killers. Make no mistake about it. The fact is, though, it's their country. And if they want to impose their barbarism there a whole lot more, then we want to deny them their chance. This is an old saying. In war, the enemy gets a vote. The Taliban have had their vote for the last 18 years, and America had its own votes too. Being a great nation requires admitting when your clock has been cleaned and doing everything humanly possible to strike some sort of deal that satisfies your domestic populace and keeps your country safe at the same time. Perhaps if we had handled the situation better in 2001, we wouldn't have to invite literal terrorists to the United States and strike a deal with them. Instead, idiotic decision after idiotic decision has put us in this situation. We need to pray that perhaps our leaders can come to some agreement that sets us free from one of the greatest follies in our history. And I think, Crystal, one of the things that really annoyed me whenever I saw all of the coverage of this is that they were like the audacity in order to try and negotiate a war, an end to the war in Afghanistan. I mean, this is something that we have voted for over and over and over again. We see this on the Democratic Party with the rise of people like Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, these are things that we should champion. And the fact that the establishment doesn't like it means that I only like it more.
I'm actually really curious to hear what Congresswoman Gabbard has to say on this.
I looked for the record. She hadn't said anything.
Yeah, she hasn't weighed in yet. I looked as well. Look, no one who says we can end this conflict without negotiating with the Taliban is being honest. I mean, you have to negotiate with the Taliban. That's where we are. Now, we can hand-wring about decisions of the past, which we should, and we should take a good hard look at it. That is where we are today. However, you talk about the Afghan government is riddled with corruption and ineptitude. The problem is our own government is riddled with corruption and ineptitude. And here's the thing. I mean, we're supposed to take Trump's word for it, that this is the reason he decided to pull out. The reality is we don't have to negotiate with the Taliban at Camp David days before 9/11. That part is unnecessary. From the reporting, from what we know at least, this deal was more or less signed, sealed, and delivered. But the president, out of hubris, out of his desire to have this grand scene and for him to be the one viewed as putting this thing together, wanted to bring everybody to Camp David. And that's where it fell apart. I mean, look, we don't know all the details because you can't trust anything that this president or administration says, but that's what it looks like actually happened.
From my perspective, what it looks like is we had a deal-ish with the Taliban. The Afghan government itself, who are professionals in corruption, I should add, are the ones who didn't actually want to sign on because they're corrupt and they want to remain in power. And the real truth is that shows the fundamental problem here, that our partner government is not a great partner. And this is just something it's bipartisan failure after bipartisan failure. Now, I think, and I've, in my studies, what I've seen is that actually the more failed negotiations and breakdowns that you have, the more likely you are to actually eventually reach something. So Godspeed, Mr. President, anybody who will sit down with these people to try and end this war.
It is time to end the wars.